For nearly 30 years, nobody has stood trial for killing Tupac Shakur. Why? Because when it comes to murder, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. Enter the last living suspect in a decades-old murder who just kept talking. He gave interviews, lots of interviews. He wrote a book. He put himself inside the vehicle. And now, Keefe D is finally going to trial.
And I'm getting mighty tired of your trifling ways and of listening to that jackass bray.
For almost 30 years, the murder of actor and rapper Tupac Shakur lived somewhere between a cold case and an American legend. Everybody had a theory. Everybody had a suspect. Everybody seemed to know something, but nobody was on trial until now. Duane Keefe D. Davis spent years publicly placing himself inside the story of Tupac's final night. And according to prosecutors, he admitted something even more important, that he supplied the gun. Now, nearly 30 years later, after Tupac Shakur was shot on a Las Vegas street, Keefe D is about to learn whether all that talking was just storytelling or evidence. And this case raises a fascinating legal question. Can you talk yourself into a murder conviction when prosecutors can't even prove you fired the gun? Tupac was in Vegas for the Mike Tyson-Bruce Seldon fight at the MGM Grand. After the fight, surveillance footage captured something that would become critical to understanding what happened later that night. Tupac and his entourage attacked this guy, Orlando Anderson, inside the MGM Grand. But Anderson wasn't just some random man caught in a casino fight. He was Keefe D's nephew. And according to the prosecution's theory, what happened inside the casino created the motive for what would happen several hours later. Later that night, Tupac was riding a black Beamer driven by Death Row Records co-founder Marion Suge Knight. Now at about 11:15, they stopped near Flamingo Road and Colville Lane. A white Cadillac pulled up alongside of them. Tupac was struck multiple times. Suge was wounded. And 6 days later, Tupac died. Police investigated, rumors exploded, and conspiracy theories multiplied. But yet, no murder trial, no prosecution. Years became decades. Orlando Anderson, long suspected by investigators, died in another shooting in 1998. Now, other men believed to have occupied the Cadillac also died, leaving just one man standing, Duane Davis, Keefe D. And instead of fading to black, Keefe D started talking. Keefe D's name has been connected to this case for years, and he repeatedly discussed what happened. In interviews and in his 2019 book, Compton Street Legend, he described being inside the Cadillac involved in the shooting. Now, according to the prosecution, Davis wasn't merely a passenger who happened to witness a murder. Prosecutors allege that after Orlando Anderson was beaten at the MGM Grand, Davis got a gun, participated in retaliation that ultimately ended up with Tupac being shot. Now, Nevada does not necessarily have to prove Keefe D fired the bullets that killed Tupac, because under Nevada law, the person who pulls the trigger isn't the only person who can be guilty of murder. In plain English, if prosecutors can prove that Keefe D knowingly helped make the murder happen, the fact that someone else's finger may have been on the trigger doesn't automatically save him. So the question isn't, can Nevada prove Keefe D shot Tupac? It's, can Nevada prove Keefe D intentionally helped set the killing in motion? And prosecutors say Keefe D's own mouth helps them answer that. Imagine being a prosecutor handed a near 30-year-old murder. No murder weapon recovered. Several central figures are dead. Memories have aged. Witnesses have disappeared. Rumor and fact have been mixed together for 3 decades. Now imagine discovering that one of the alleged participants spent years publicly talking about what happened. That is the bizarre position Nevada prosecutors find themselves in. Now, Keefe D participated in a 2008 police interview concerning Tupac's killing, and that interview became one of the biggest legal fights in this case. His attorneys argued that statements from that police interview were protected and shouldn't be used against him. But shortly before trial, the judge ruled that prosecutors can use that 2008 interview. Why? The prosecution argued that Davis made the information public himself, and the judge agreed that his later disclosures meant the interview could be admitted. The irony. Keefe D's defense essentially argued you promised you wouldn't use these statements against him. The prosecutors responded, then you went out and told the whole world. That ruling matters because this prosecution is not built around DNA. It's not even built around a recovered murder weapon or even blurry surveillance footage. The major part of this case is built around words. What Keefe D said, when he said it, who he said it to, and whether the jury believes him then or believes him now. Are they going to believe old Keefe D or are they going to believe young Keefe D? Because Keefe D's position today is dramatically different.
Did you have anything to do with the murder of Tupac Shakur?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am. I wasn't even in Nevada. I wasn't in Nevada, period.
Do you regret the book and the interview?
Yeah, I was just after the money, and they said I was covered. I did it for the money.
Yep. This guy maintains his innocence and has argued publicly that some of the stories attributed to him were exaggerated or told for entertainment and financial reasons. And that creates a most fascinating credibility problem. Because if you're Keefe D, which argument do you make? That the stories were true but legally protected, or that the stories were all fabricated? Because prosecutors are going to ask the jury to believe that Keefe D was telling the truth before he was facing life in prison. And the defense is going to ask that same jury to consider whether a man could exaggerate his involvement in one of the most famous murders in music history because notoriety sells. And that's not a ridiculous defense. People embellish stories all the time just to monetize infamy. Just go over there to TikTok. People lie in books, people lie in interviews, and any admission is only as valuable as its reliability. So this means prosecutors have a big job, more than simply pressing play on an old interview and saying, see, he said it. They still have to prove that the story is true. The state's case is challenging. The 3 other men identified as occupants of the Cadillac that night, Orlando Anderson, Terry Brown, DeAndre Smith, all dead. For years, Orlando Anderson was widely identified as the suspected gunman, but there's also been accounts suggesting that DeAndre Smith may have fired the weapon. Prosecutors don't necessarily need to solve that dispute to convict Davis under their theory of liability, but psychologically, it kind of matters. A jury hearing a murder case naturally wants to know who pulled the trigger, where's the gun, what physical evidence connects this defendant to the murder. And the defense can exploit every unanswered question because reasonable doubt doesn't require the defense to solve Tupac's murder. The defense doesn't have to tell the jury who killed him. They only have to convince jurors that Nevada has not proven Keefe D's criminal responsibility beyond a reasonable doubt. Here's the paradox. The jury may essentially have to determine which version of Keefe D deserves to be believed. If the jury concludes his public statements were truthful, the defense has a serious problem. But if jurors conclude that he was willing to lie about his involvement for attention and for money and for fame, prosecutors inherit yet another problem. How do you build a murder conviction around a storyteller you admit may have spent years changing the story? That's why corroboration is everything. The state needs evidence outside of Keefe D's mouth that matches the important pieces of what he said. And every independent fact that matches his previous accounts makes it harder for the defense to dismiss those accounts as fiction. And every important detail prosecutors can't corroborate gives the defense another place to insert reasonable doubt. One of the most important pieces of evidence is something everybody has already seen. That casino footage, because the MGM Grand fight gives prosecutors something a 30-year-old murder case desperately needs: a documented event immediately preceding the killing. Tupac and his entourage attacked Orlando Anderson, Keefe D's nephew. Hours later, Tupac was shot. That doesn't prove Keefe D murdered anyone, but it gives prosecutors a potential motive and a timeline, and the state can build outward from there. Fight, retaliation, search for Tupac, Cadillac, gun, shooting. Boom. That's the narrative prosecutors want jurors to accept. The defense's job is to break that chain, because proving Orlando Anderson had a reason to retaliate against Tupac is not the same thing as proving Keefe D knowingly participated in his murder. And that's where this trial stops being a hip-hop documentary and becomes a criminal prosecution. The state doesn't get a conviction because theory sounds plausible. It doesn't get a conviction because millions of people have heard the same story for decades. It doesn't get a conviction just because Tupac deserves justice. It gets a conviction only if 12 jurors are convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that this defendant is legally responsible for that murder. Keefe D may never testify in his own defense, and to be fair, he has talked enough over the past 30 years. If he doesn't testify, prosecutors still have access to something unusually powerful. Young Keefe D, the man who gave interviews when he wasn't sitting at a defense table, the man who participated in talks about the killing, the man who published a memoir including the killing, the man who described his own role before a murder conviction was staring him in the face. And that's why this trial fascinates me, because prosecutors may essentially put two versions of the same man in front of the jury. Keefe before the indictment and Keefe after the indictment. One talked, the other says he's innocent. And somewhere between those two versions, 12 jurors have to decide what happened on Flamingo Road in 1996. And for nearly 30 years, Tupac Shakur's murder survived on rumors, books, interviews, documentaries, street stories, conspiracy theories, and endless arguments about who was responsible. Now, all of that noise has to fit through the narrow doorway of a courtroom, and rumor becomes testimony. Stories become exhibits. Old interviews become evidence, and allegations finally encounter the burden of proof. Maybe Keefe D spent years telling the truth about Tupac's murder. Maybe he exaggerated his role because being connected to Tupac's death made people listen to him. Maybe prosecutors can corroborate his story. Maybe they can't. And that's what this jury has to decide. But here's the irony that's almost impossible to ignore. For decades, Tupac couldn't tell us what happened that night. Most of the other men allegedly inside the Cadillac couldn't tell us either. But Keefe D could talk, and he did. Now the talking is over, because jury selection is underway, and the audience that matters isn't watching him on YouTube. They're not reading his book. They're not listening to another documentary. They're sitting in the jury box. And this time, Keefe D isn't telling the story. The state of Nevada is telling the story back to him.